Hi everyone, I'm Luke Hector and you're watching The Broken Meeple. This is a YouTube channel about board games where I give reviews, top 10s and my honest opinions, regardless of the consequences.
Get on with it.
Right, sorry this is taking me a while folks. Earthborne Rangers, we're finally here to talk about this game. I wanted to look at this back in the start of August time, but unfortunately the UK, being the UK, got delayed with Kickstarter fulfillment and it didn't arrive until literally the day before I went to Essen. And of course, go to Essen, there's an whole week, and then after Essen, all the reviews I've been putting out. So trying to get this played has been somewhat difficult in order to fit the time in, but I have finally managed to spend the occasional day on what little spare weekends I've had recently to just knuckle down and go through as much of this game as possible so that I can give it a review. Now, obviously, I have not played through the entire campaign of this. It is a campaign game over multiple sessions, so no, I have not played it from start to finish, but I believe I have played more than enough of this game to get a decent idea of whether I'm enjoying it from a gameplay perspective, and I am talking specifically from a solo perspective here. I have played this multiplayer once or twice, but that's mainly just to teach other players it and like the demos I've had. This review is mainly from me playing it solo for about, say, half a campaign to say, okay, this is my thoughts. So, let's get on with it. It's about time. Earthborne Rangers is a campaign that stretches over 30 days, each day essentially representing a session of game time. But what it is that it's set in kind of in a sense, a futuristic setting with national parks and all the outdoors and everything, where you are basically playing a ranger. And as a ranger, you have these different abilities, whether it involves like mystical abilities of being able to commune with nature and creatures, or being like a fitness expert, so you're really good at traversing the landscape, or a tech whiz where you got all these weird funky gadgets to help you map out locations and such. And what you will do is that you will take control of one of these rangers, you will customize your deck of cards, which has your own personal construction of cards that relate to your class that you've picked, your personality that you've also picked, as well as a kind of like a profession that you've picked. And so what you will do is you play through this story campaign. That's almost a bit like games that I've talked about in the past, like Lands of Galzier, where it's fairly open world. There is a story in place. There is a plot mission to go to, which will go through the actual story. But there's also different locations and different cards to interact with, and different things like side missions and stories where you can kind of just go off and do it at your own pace. Very much kind of like a Skyrim type game. You know where the plot is, you know where to go for the plot, but you know what? If you fancy just going over there and helping somebody out with their little search and rescue mission, then, well, you can. Go ahead. What's it going to stop you? The core mechanics of the game represent around your aspects, which are awareness, spirit, fitness, and focus. I had to lift those up to remember those. And the idea is that when you go into a location, the location will set up based on a specific criteria of cards, and the deck of cards, called the path deck, will be constructed based on the location you're going to and the type of terrain that it is. So grasslands, plains, mountains, that kind of thing. Each one has its own series of challenges and things for you to find. You will then lay out your cards, and you will have a hand of cards and you play them using this as effectively like a currency. You spend these in order to play cards, but they also represent your values for committing to skill checks. So when I decide, you know what, I've got to traverse and get past this thorn bush, this is a very light example, but let's say like a really bad thorny bush or something that I've got to get past. I might have to commit, a fitness check in order to get past it. Well, then I commit as many as I want from the discs that I have already. I might be able to commit further cards from my hand that have the same symbology that, reverts around that test. Each one has its own symbol. And then what you will do is that you'll flip a card from this challenge deck, which essentially gives you a modifier on the test itself. If you succeed, then whatever you committed represents your value for whatever, like, progress markers or tokens or, damage or whatever it is you're doing. Now, this game is very much more about exploration and, seeing the places and helping people out. Yes, there are creatures, and yes, there are ones that you can technically harm, but this takes a bit more of a pacifist approach where, yes, you can technically harm something, but it's not necessarily saying you're killing it. It's more that you just get it to go away, or or it dissipates, unless it's some weird gribbly creature. But no, you are not going through this hunting deer and rabbits and all that sort of stuff. It's not that kind of game. If anything, it wants you to take a much less violent approach to that kind of thing. But the game kind of carries on in that aspect, and your deck represents your fatigue, which is essentially how long you can play before your character character tires out and you have to reset for the next day. It's going to tire out at some point, you can't avoid it, it's just a case of how long it takes. Reckless actions will use up more fatigue, which means you're going to tire out quicker, but if you play it safe, you'll be able to go on a little bit longer, and so it just is essentially a ticking time bomb for when the day ends, and you have to say, right, that's it, day over, next gaming session. You'll carry on in this fashion, going through all these different locations and exploring all sorts of things. I don't know how the campaign ends because I haven't got that far, but so far, you know, I've got a decent way through it. And so it's kind of like your adventure. Pick a character, construct the deck, tweak it over time, go out, explore, do what you want to do.
On the road again. Sing it with me, Shrek. I can't wait to get on the road again.
Okay, so quite a lot to talk about there, and you're probably getting vibes of a lot of these similar campaign open world style games, and 2 or 3 in particular do spring to mind. Recently, I talked about a game called Lands of Galzir, which was a very lightweight open world game which didn't really have a main plot per se. You started off with a similar plot line, but then you could kind of do whatever you pleased in the hopes of just gaining more reputation. This is not quite as open world as that is. I mean, yes, there is an open world for you to explore, but there is a limit on the stuff that you can find, and obviously there is a main plot that you are technically supposed to go through at some stage. So it's not quite as open and expansive as that, but it's not exactly far off. And this one definitely has more mechanics going on than, say, Lands of Galzir. So if you consider that to be the light family weight version, this is probably maybe more of a gamer version, but it's not terribly complicated. Other games it kind of gives a feeling of is, you know, to some extent is things like Seventh Continent, which was entirely card-based. You know, this is all card-based, all the locations and all your character stuff and all the checks you do and everything you interact with is essentially cards and a book for, you know, interacting with various people. So it's like some story-based aspects. So you're kind of talking things like, you know, Seventh Continent would be a reasonable comparison, but this isn't like a massive epic story like something like Oathsworn or Tainted Grail or any of those sort of games. This is definitely more on a kind of, you know, I wouldn't even call it Zen-like really, but it's just like, it's more of a pleasant setting and a Skyrim type feel. Go through it at your own pace, do the side stories when you want to. You want to gun through the mission, the main mission plot at, you know, hyperspeed, then by all means do, but you'll be tempted by other things to do around the place and like, well, you know what, you know, we could take a break to go check out this archaeological site. Yeah, why not? And, you know, those sort of things come into play. So, Lands of Galzir, Seventh Continent, somewhere in between. Very quickly from an aesthetics point of view, this is entirely FSC certified. This is basically all sustainable materials. So everything from the cards to the tokens to the box, the insert, if you can call it that, you know, is all sustainable. And so if you're definitely into that aspect when it comes to how games are made, then you'll be pleased to know that this one is going to tick that box for you.
Or else I'll turn you into a f***ing tree.
Of course, that comes at a slight price because you are sort of building to a budget at that stage. These cardboard tokens are kind of normal, but the cards themselves are decent enough. I mean, they feel sturdy just fine. I am sleeving them as they go along, so they're not the thickest card stock in the world, but I wouldn't say they were poor quality either. I mean, they do the job nicely. You will probably sleeve the game like I am, which kind of defeats the purpose of being sustainable if I'm using plastic on it, but now, well, I digress. But, you know, the rest of it is still fine. I mean, the books are still decent enough quality. These are not going to tear. There's still plenty of information here. The box itself is a little bit on the basic side. I mean, I would have liked the box lid to have used the cover that it originally did, because when I saw the picture of this on the banners, it had this bright blue, vibrant, really gorgeous looking picture. And then we got this as the cover, which honestly looks pretty bland, if I'm being honest. But, oh well, that's a small gripe. But you don't really get an insert in the box either with this edition. You basically got this like cardboard thing that you assemble, and it splits it into essentially 9 cubby holes. Although, to be honest, that's kind of all you need, because it's more than enough space for you to put the cards in specific spots that you need them to be, you know, at your leisure. Now, you know, you might maybe want to get some foam blocks and stick them in there just to keep them more upright, because, you know, there's maybe a bit too much space in this box for what's in this game, because there's only so many cards, and even if you sleeve everything, it's not going to take up a lot of space in there. So, if anything, this is kind of an oversized box for what you're getting.
We just make boxes here.
In terms of art, the art is mainly on the cards for say. I mean, you do have like, you know, a few cool things like a map showing you the entire sort of landscape that you can traverse over, but the artwork is decent actually on a lot of these cards. I mean, I showed this one in particular like with a little mountain landscape here, and it's, you know, it's very picturesque. It actually looks like somewhere I'd like to go hiking, frankly. The cards that you've got in your character deck, you know, I've got, you know, it's kind of glaring a bit on the light, but you know, they've got decent artwork as well. Although the artwork kind of chops and changes between two styles. You have the very colourful, like proper artwork, and then you've got this almost kind of like silhouetted artwork, which has like a kind of beigey background and it's all silhouetted rather than actually, you know, a piece of art. I'm not sure why they chop and change between these two styles. I find it a bit jarring to sort of pick up one card that looks really gorgeous and then to pick up this other card which looks not bad, but just a bit different, you know. I don't know why they didn't just stick with one art style and run with it, but that's a minor gripe. So yeah, it is built to a budget because of the whole sustainable thing, but I don't think the components here are bad. They're just not necessarily anything to write home about. In terms of variety, there's a decent amount in this box. I mean, you can pick from one of 4 roles. You know, I've got the Seeker as my role, but there's also a Shepherd, Engineer, that kind of thing. Then you've got 4 specialities. The Shaper is a speciality, Explorer, Conciliator, whatever they do. And, you know, so you've got 4 particular classes and 4 roles, and then you can also pick a personality type for each one, which basically dictates some of these attribute cards that you start the game with. And even when you have picked that, your cards that you're allowed to put in your deck via construction is dependent on which aspects you have. So you can have up to 3 in a particular aspect, but you've got 4 of them. So I've got 3 in fitness, so fitness is my highest stat, but as a compromise, my spirit sucks. So I'm not very good at communing with nature, but I can traverse the landscape a lot better. But it's not that you have to pick specific aspects because of your role. You can do what you like. You know, I want to be a shepherd who's also an explorer speciality. Great, do it. Have that combination. And then the cards that you're allowed to have are dictated by your attributes. So if you've only got an attribute of 1 in awareness, you won't be able to take any cards that specifically say awareness 2 or 3. So there's a lot of flexibility in how you construct your character. And in a multiplayer game, you're going to see 4 very different styles of play going around. Unfortunately, in solo mode, you kind of build your one character and then that's kind of it for the whole campaign. Although, you do get to tweak your deck throughout the campaign at times, which is pretty cool. You can actually use cards sometimes that weren't in the classes you started the game with, and I've already done that to some extent, and I like it. I like, you know, when those opportunities come round, I'm sometimes like, well, I should be focusing on this, but you know what? Hang on a minute. I just want to go and do this because you know that you get to upgrade your deck with some cool card. And there are more upgrades besides. As you go through the game, you will complete missions. You'll get some, you know, some like reward points, as they call it, like reward cards. They'll be specifically named. You'll draw them out of the box, and then whenever you rest between days on the campaign, you'll be able to bring those cards into your deck and go, well, I'm going to get rid of this one and replace it with this one. And so there is an element of upgrading and that throughout the campaign, and it's going to be very different every time you play it. The theme in this game is very strong, not watertight. There are occasions where you might have to kind of stretch the boundaries a little bit, particularly with the word harm, because a lot of the tests involve you having to deal harm to something, but it's not entirely clear as to what you're doing in regards to harm. You know, you're not necessarily killing a creature, you just might like scratch it and it shoos off somewhere, so you're like, fine. But then how do you harm a rock slide? You know, there's some of these bits that you kind of have to like you have to kind of invent what's going on a little bit at times, but for the most part the theme, the setting is done very well. When I'm playing this, particularly if I put on some music, board game music's a very good YouTube channel I use for that sort of thing. Seriously, put the Parks soundtrack from that on when you're playing this game. Man, it fits so well. But you know, when you play it, you're kind of immersed into this world and you're interested in exploring. It's not just simply, right, I've got to do this quest, I've got to go save this person. It could literally be that you've just gone to this random mountain and you're like, well, let's have a look around. Well, there's a little creature there, there's a little kitty cat, and oh, I know, and I've come across another ranger. All right, let's interact with you for a bit. And that sort of stuff just keeps you immersed and keeps you engaged. But on top of that, I like little touches that they've put on these cards. You've already got flavor text on the card to represent what you're doing. So, you know, I mean, what have I got here? Like a phonoscopic headset, and then it will mention like, you tap the sensor at your temple and a sight and sound converge to evoke a scene in your mind beyond which your ears and eye can normally comprehend. That's the flavor text on a card, so it goes into a lot of decent detail. But what I really love, I mean, this is a small thing, but when you do a test, it says the test and the difficulty, but rather than just simply having the text, it has the title keyword for the check. So in this case, overlook, but then in italics it says afterwards, so overlook in italics the surrounding valley to choose a nearby location. Attach one card to it. So it basically in italics gives you the thematic flavor of what you're doing before it talks about the mechanics. That's a cool little neat little touch, and it just adds to that immersion factor. Yes, it's not watertight. There's a couple of occasions where you have to kind of how's that work? But in the end, I really liked that when I saw it, and I'm not aware of any other game that does that, but if they do, then kudos. It's just something that just helps me to keep me immersed, and that's what this game needs to do. If you play this solely as a mechanical fest, then you're probably going to be disappointed or not see much of the merits of it. The theme is strong and you need to embrace it.
What the hell are you talking about?
The card play is a nice, simple one, but still engaging, because you've got multiple rounds, but you've got this ticking time bomb of your deck running out, so you can only spend so long in an area before you might think, well, I need to get moving, because I'm starting to get too fatigued here. But the skill checks and how you do these are a cool thing. So if I want to play the trail mix, I need to spend 2 fitness, okay, fine. But then on this turn, it might be like, well, I don't know. Do I want to instead try and traverse this area? Well, I'm going to need some fitness to do that. And so the whole thing becomes a balancing act between getting cards out and doing the tests, which is a nice little system. I particularly also like the way the challenge deck has this thing at the bottom, which again adds to the theme, but it's a symbol at the bottom, a mountain, a sun, or a weird little ranger symbol, whatever. And the idea is every time you do a skill check, you look at the bottom and then look at all the cards that are laid out to see whether there is anything out there that has the same symbol written on it, and when it does, they all trigger. And this basically is the world kind of adapting and interacting with you as you play. So you might have a bunch of, a couple of predator wolves out there, and it's like, well, if I do a skill check and I draw the red symbol, then that wolf's going to potentially attack me and cause injury. Do I want to do a skill check? Do I take the chance? Do I deal with the wolf first, or do I do a couple of skill checks, suck up the injury, and just deal with it later? These little cool decisions that you make are not only thematically immersive, but also work from an engaging perspective. There's a lot of airborne noises going on lately, so if you hear anything, I do apologise. Now, I have talked a lot about the good aspects of this game, but there are still a few negatives that I do need to mention. Firstly is the act of repetition. There is a travel aspect to this game where you're going from location to location, and as I mentioned, whenever you get to a new location, you have to find a location card, get the terrain that's associated with the path you took, mix it up with maybe some random exploration cards from a valley deck or the proper location, depending what you're doing. All of these are mixed together into the deck, and then you start from there. This is what you have to do for every location you get to, whether or not you even want to go there. So I might be wanting to get to the next stage of this mission. Well, okay, that's 3 locations away. So I know I need to get to this 3rd place, but I've got to go through 2 bits in between, and I'm not interested in what's in those 2 bits right now. So you still have to go, right, I'll go through this location, find the location card. Yes, I've been here before, I know what it's like. Get the locations, right, boom, deck, right, go. And then you have to spend a few turns going through the motions to get the requirements you need to be able to exit the location and go to the next one. Then I go to the next one, I've got to do the same thing again, and then I get to the 3rd one, and then I get to focus on whatever it was I was trying to focus on. You might argue that that's fine, you're trying to explore the world and you're not too fussed about the mission at that time, but still, it does get a little bit repetitive every now and again.
Of course!
The repetition aspect is also confounded with some of the terrain cards that you see. So every time I go through the lakeshore area, I know what's in the lakeshore deck. So I know what to expect, I know how to deal with it, and especially when I'm using the same character, it's like, look, we've seen this before. Yes, the cats come in, if you get too many of them, they'll overthrow you, but there's a place that can get rid of them. And so, there is an aspect of new stuff that you can find, but most of the time it's essentially taking 3 cards from this little deck here and adding them at random to the deck that you're doing for the location. These are cool because I have not seen everything that comes out of this deck yet, even though there's not so many cards in there, and even if they do come out to the deck, I haven't necessarily interacted with them. So this aspect's cool, but do I want to stay forever in a particular location just to find one of 3 cards in, out of a deck of 20, 30 cards? to get where I need to go. And this is actually more of a problem in solo mode than it is in other players, because the deck does not scale for players. So if you play this as a 4-player game, you have 4 people drawing a path card every turn. So you're going through that deck really, really fast and finding the stuff. But in the solo mode, you're only drawing 1 card every turn. So you might be in a situation where it's like, right, next card is... Oh, it's one of those. Okay, fine. Right, next day, reset, counters, whatever. Right, next card. Oh, it's not that either. Right, fine. Reset, go play some card. Right, next card. Right. And you find yourself kind of stuck there, just waiting for the card to hurry up and come out of the deck so you can interact with it. There are some cards in the game that do allow you to scout ahead and find certain cards, and believe me, I am so glad that my character is kind of half focused on this, because if it wasn't, I think it would be worse. But it does sort of bound into the whole aspect that there is an element of repetition and a little element of searching, particularly in solo mode, that probably wouldn't be as apparent in multiplayer, that you've got to contend with. And you know, I'm noticing it already halfway through a campaign. By the end of the campaign, is it going to grate even more? The rule books are also not as great as I would like. I mean, we've got this book here with all the different paragraphs of story that you can read, and it's written well, but we've already discovered errata, which is on the Board Game Geek website, and some of the errata is game-breaking. There are certain bits of online errata that you can find for this, where if you have not read them in advance, you will not be able to progress properly through the missions because it leaves out a key thing that it's supposed to give you. That sort of thing should not apply in games like this. I'm more than willing to, you know, give you some leeway when it comes to these things, because there's a lot of text, there's a lot of story, there's all sorts of things. You can't account for every scenario, but this is stuff that happens in the prologue of the game. Surely during playtesting, somebody should have noticed that this was a problem and it should have been fixed.
Tiny misunderstanding still. My hopes weren't high.
But having to look up errata before you start this game is kind of annoying, because the casual player isn't going to be aware of this. I'm only aware of it because I know people who have played this game and I do my research. Those who don't do their research are going to get caught up in this and it's going to drive them insane. The rulebook as well is not terrible, but it's written more about how it tries to immerse you in the game rather than actually trying to explain how it works. There's a decent sized FAQ for this already, and the book is not very good at referencing rules. In terms of how to play the game, once you've read through this book, you should be able to know how to play the game for the most part, but there are times where there are certain key rules that are just not mentioned that really should be, and whenever I think, oh, hang on a minute, how does this work with the fast travel? When I try to go back through the book and find it, it's a bit of a nightmare, because I'm like, well, hang on, there's playing a campaign. Card anatomy, I kid you not, is halfway through the book. That should not be a thing. And then before card anatomy, you have additional concepts. Shouldn't card anatomy come before then? Just saying. You know, fatigue, clearing cards, performing a test. You know, this is the stuff beforehand. And then you've got like the phases, and then I have to find out, oh, hang on, whereabouts in travel do I do this bit? It's, you know, it's not the worst rulebook I've read, but it's just, its layout is problematic. And there were certain times where I thought, hang on a minute, I've got an injury here. So if I have to take fatigue every round, this is going to cripple me always. So what am I supposed to do about it? Well, apparently you don't carry those injuries over to your next day when you reset the game up. The problem is, the thing doesn't tell you this in the rules. I had somebody had to clarify this for me, otherwise I'd have been wandering around with like a cut arm or something, constantly messing up my game. An editor was badly needed to go through this, and I feel like a 2.0 of Earthborne Rangers could fix a lot of this, but yeah, you need to get an editor to look at your rulebook, guys. You need to get this better. You need to sort out the errata. You need to 2.0 this rulebook, because it hasn't broken the game for me, although that's only because I did my research. It could break the game for others, but yeah, there's just a few too many mistakes and just a little bit of extra hassle that I had to go through to learn this, that honestly, for as not too complicated as the game is, should not have been a factor.
I award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul.
So Earthborne Rangers overall is enjoyable, but I was gushing for this when I saw it at the Games Expo. When I got into the demo, I was like, fantastic demo. Love this theme, love this concept, this is going to be brilliant, this could be a 10 out of 10 game of the year for me. Not quite. This game is very enjoyable though, don't get me wrong, but there are a few negatives that are starting to grate more and more as I play, and you know, some aspects of this game really shouldn't have been problems. If they could have just fixed those beforehand, it could have really elevated this as well. That being said, the game is immersing me very good. Solid theme, done very well. You know, the gameplay is still engaging. What I do with my cards, how I upgrade it as time goes on, whether I go off and do side quests or do the main mission, that stuff is all really cool. You know, so I do enjoy it. But the negatives mainly stem around two aspects. The repetition of going through the different locations and having to go through the same motions just to get from A to B is a bit like the padding that you had in, what was it called? Etherfields that Awakened Realms did. Same sort of deal. That aspect, yes, I know it adds to exploration. You might argue that you might see something new there, but it's still essentially padding. That is basically what it is. And even then, the different cards that I see in each terrain in that, I'm going to memorize by the time this campaign is done. So if I was to play it again, I feel like I would have seen a lot of what this game has to offer already. And I'm just getting the odd little tidbit now and again. The only main change being, I now have this deck with these different cards, which is only going to be so good. And also the rulebook, the other main problem, because I'm still rules referencing at times when I play this, and it's a nightmare to get a rules reference. I don't know if there's a piece of errata I should be aware of. I can't be bothered to check a list of errata all the time to see while I'm playing this. But the fact that it's not the best rulebook to begin with, and the fact that there's errata that's game breaking in the first prologue, that's still a bit of a big deal, people. That really should have needed to be fixed. But overall, still enjoying the game, and I am glad that I've been playing it, and I do intend to see it through to completion, and I'm going to enjoy it. But I feel like it's just maybe just needed a little bit more time in the oven, or maybe just a few like other things like done to it. But overall, still enjoying it, and maybe the rating could go up over time. But for now, it's getting a solid 8 out of 10. I really do think it's a great game, and I'm enjoying it. But I thought this could have been 10 out of 10 levels here. This could have easily just ticked every box that I had to make it fantastic. I am enjoying it, but I can't overlook those aspects. You know, if I'd only reviewed this after, say, 4 or 5 plays, like a couple of days in the campaign, some of those negatives probably wouldn't have even been a factor. I might even discover more by the time I've finished the campaign. But getting through between a third to half of a campaign, these things are starting to crop up, and so I've got to be mindful of that. But still enjoyable, still getting my money's worth at an 8 out of 10. Great, just not quite a distinction level. So that's it for me on this episode of The Broken Meeple. If you like what you see, then please thumb it up on YouTube and thumb it up on Board Game Geek when the review goes live on the site. Don't forget to check out more content on the channel, including all the reviews I've been doing for Essen lately. It's insane how many I've been doing. Hopefully you've been enjoying them. Hopefully there's a lot of games for you to consider before Christmas or maybe into the new year, depending on their release date. So take care, and remember, regardless of where you want to travel in the valley next time, it's still only a game, so pick your path, and bye for now.